Imagine waking up one morning and realizing the price you pay at the gas pump, and honestly, the cost of almost everything you buy, is being decided by a single cargo ship floating halfway across the world. I mean, how quickly can global trade and everyday life just flip overnight?
Well, we tend to think of the global economy as this, immovable, permanent mountain, but in reality, it's a highly fragile system. And right now, it is entirely dependent on a standoff happening in one really narrow, highly contested stretch of water.
Yeah, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are examining the rapidly escalating standoff between the U.S. and Iran. We're looking at a strict naval blockade, a ticking clock on a fragile ceasefire, and these military actions that are basically rewriting the rules of global trade in real time.
Right, and the sources for today's analysis are pulled directly from recent Fox News broadcast transcripts. So we're really tracing the military strategy on the ground, the economic impacts that are, rippling through the markets right now, and the intense political maneuvers happening both abroad and right here at home.
And just to jump in here, because those sources feature highly charged political commentary from across the aisle, we want to make something perfectly clear before we get into the weeds. We aren't taking sides or endorsing any political viewpoints today. Our job is strictly to unpack the original material, map out the mechanics of what's happening, and give you the facts exactly as they've been reported.
Exactly. The focus is entirely on the variables driving the outcomes. I mean, if you really want to understand the levers of power currently being pulled, you have to look at the physical realities of the conflict.
Right. So whether you're a geopolitics junkie or just someone wondering why your energy bills are fluctuating so wildly this week, we're going to cut through the noise and hopefully give you those aha moments. So let's start on the water, because over the weekend, the abstract political tension we've been hearing about turned into, well, highly concrete military action.
Yeah, it really did.
The U.S. redirected 27 vessels over the weekend just to enforce a naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. But there was one Iranian-flagged cargo vessel, the Tuska, that just flat out refused to comply.
And, what's fascinating here is the sheer timeline of that encounter. According to U.S. Central Command, U.S. forces issued warnings to the Tuska for 6 solid hours.
Wow, 6 hours.
6 hours. They were on the radio, repeatedly informing the crew, you are entering a military blockade. They're ordering them to vacate the engine room and actively warning them of disabling fire. And 6 hours, that gives a crew every conceivable opportunity to alter course.
And they still refused. Okay, let's unpack this, because it's like a high-stakes game of maritime chicken, but played with billions of dollars in military-grade weapons. So the U.S. Marines actually rappelled onto the deck of the moving ship from helicopters, and then they fired a 5-inch gun into the engine room to physically disable the vessel.
Yeah.
The physical logistics of that blow my mind. Boarding a moving cargo ship from the air, knowing the crew has had 6 hours to prepare and potentially arm themselves, that is an incredibly high-risk operation.
Oh, absolutely. It requires immense operational precision because the U.S. forces aren't just sending a message here, right? They are physically dismantling the propulsion capabilities of the ship. And the stakes of what was actually on that ship justify the risk.
Right, the cargo.
Exactly. The Tuska had come from China, it made a stop in Malaysia, and the Washington Post suspects it was carrying dual-use chemicals for manufacturing missiles.
Jeez. Enforcing a blockade like this, it sounds less like holding a standard military front line and more like running a massive, high-stakes customs checkpoint on a highway with no lanes, where half the drivers have fake license plates.
That is exactly the operational reality of dealing with shadow fleets. China relies heavily on the Persian Gulf for oil, but they frequently use unregulated shipping to bypass international scrutiny.
So they're just flying under the radar.
Right. These vessels operate entirely outside the safety regulations of the International Maritime Organization. So when a ship like the Tuska, which is suspected of carrying missile chemicals, just ignores a 5-inch gun warning from a U.S. warship, it exposes a startling level of defiance. They are willfully testing the perimeter to see if the U.S. will actually pull the trigger.
But that raises a massive question. If there's a heavily enforced blockade, and 27 other ships have already looked at the U.S. warships and wisely turned around, why would a single cargo ship try to just blast through it? What were they thinking? Are they operating on entirely different orders?
Well, the defiance of that single ship points directly to the power struggle currently tearing through Tehran. The reason the ship might have tried to break the blockade is that the people negotiating for peace and the people commanding the ships they're no longer on the same page.
Yeah, the sources describe this total leadership vacuum. The supreme leader was killed, his son is reportedly injured and unable to really demonstrate he's in charge, and so this massive void has opened up.
And stepping right into that void is the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Specifically, a hardliner named Major General Ahmad Vahidi.
Right.
Vahidi is the former commander of the Quds Force and a former defense minister. He actually survived the Iran-Iraq War, but he's currently operating with an Interpol Red Notice for his alleged role in a bombing at a Jewish community center in Argentina.
Wow.
So this is the man consolidating power right now, and he's dragging the political establishment along with him.
But you mentioned they aren't acting as a unified body, so how does their chain of command actually work if a hardline general can just usurp the political negotiators?
It comes down to what's called Iran's mosaic defense structure.
Yeah.
Historically, the regime built a decentralized military command. The original logic was actually to prevent a unified military from organizing a coup against the religious leaders.
Oh, interesting. So power is fractured by design.
By design, yes. The IRGC operates almost autonomously across different regions. But in a crisis, that feature becomes a fatal flaw. I mean, when you need a unified command to negotiate a ceasefire, the decentralization means no one actually has the authority to speak for the entire country.
Which perfectly explains the most surreal story from the transcripts. Over the weekend, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, who is supposed to be the face of their diplomacy, posts a message online declaring that the Strait of Hormuz is completely open. He tells the world trade is flowing.
Right.
But that exact same night, the IRGC gets on international marine radio channels, and they broadcast a message stating the strait is only open by the order of their leader, end quote, not by the tweets of some idiot.
Yeah, they publicly humiliated their own diplomatic wing on an international military frequency.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I mean, if the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing and actively hates the right hand, how does anyone negotiate a deal? It makes any diplomatic promise from their political officials look like pure theater.
Or just a stalling tactic. Because the IRGC is an organization that relies on defiance as an ideological pillar. Never surrender isn't just a slogan for them. It's an active recruitment tool they use across the Middle East to project strength.
So standing up to the U.S. blockade serves their internal purpose.
Exactly, even if it brings massive consequences to their own country.
And because there's no unified political body to actually negotiate with, it seems like the U.S. is bypassing diplomacy entirely and attacking the one thing every single faction needs to survive, which is their revenue.
Money and infrastructure, yes.
Let's talk about the economic chokehold.
This is where the abstract geopolitical tension becomes a brutal mechanical constraint. The U.S. blockade has successfully stopped roughly 80% of Iran's oil revenue.
80%.
80%. And the transcripts highlight a ticking clock that completely reframes the timeline. Iran allegedly only has 13 days of storage capacity left for their pumped oil.
Wait, 13 days.
After that 13-day window is the pivot point of the entire strategy.
Okay, I need to understand the mechanics here. If their storage tanks are full in 13 days, why can't they just temporarily cap the oil wells? Just turn off the pump like a garden hose and wait out the blockade.
Because subterranean pressure dynamics don't work like a garden hose. An active oil well relies on a very specific balance of underground pressure to keep the oil flowing upwards. If you just cap an active well, that pressure equalizes or forces fluids back down. The sand, rock, and sediment around the bore can literally collapse inward.
Oh, wow. So you ruin the well entirely.
In many cases, yes. It can permanently ruin a multi-million-dollar asset. It's not just a matter of losing a few weeks of sales. If they are forced to stop pumping, they are risking permanent geological damage to their primary industry.
That is long-term destruction. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? When you fill up your car this week, you are literally feeling the ripple effect of a geopolitical chokehold. The average price of gas in the U.S. is hovering around $4 right now. Crude oil jumped $5 in a single day to over $89 a barrel, and that was based solely on the uncertainty of the Tuska seizure.
Right.
And now President Trump is invoking the Defense Production Act, which is a wartime executive power to authorize funding for domestic coal, gas, and electrical projects.
And market analysts are already pricing in an $80 to $100 barrel of oil as the new normal until this uncertainty resolves.
But wait, I have to ask, how does invoking a wartime act for long-term electrical and coal infrastructure help the price of gas you or I pay at the pump today? Those projects take years to build.
Yeah.
How long can a country actually survive this kind of economic starvation?
Well, the Defense Production Act move is entirely about market psychology and signaling. By invoking it, the administration is signaling to global markets that the U.S. is committing to long-term, unshakable domestic energy security.
Okay, so it's a message to the markets.
Right. It attempts to calm the immediate speculative panic by proving the U.S. has the political will to outlast the crisis. Because war is fundamentally a test of endurance. By cutting off the revenue, the U.S. threatens the personal survival of the regime's leaders. But on the flip side, the U.S. administration also has to endure the political fallout of high gas prices at home.
And since Iran's conventional economy is being choked to death, they are apparently entirely reliant on asymmetric warfare like funding proxies and smuggling weapons through shadow networks.
Yeah.
And we are seeing that desperation play out far beyond the Middle East.
We really are.
The sources detail an arrest at LAX involving a woman named Shamim Mafi. What is a Los Angeles resident doing wrapped up in a Middle Eastern naval blockade? It sounds like a Hollywood movie script.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this really illustrates how modern shadow wars actually operate. So Shamim Mafi is an Iranian permanent U.S. resident, and she was living in Woodland Hills, California.
Right, in a luxury suburb.
Exactly, living the life of a typical affluent influencer driving a luxury Mercedes convertible. But she was just arrested and accused of brokering a $70 million deal to send drones, bomb fuses, and millions of rounds of ammunition to Sudan on behalf of the Iranian government.
The FBI literally found a briefcase filled with cash. I mean, she's operating a massive international arms ring from a luxury zip code in the American suburbs.
And that's the thing. Rogue nations use incredibly complex dual-use import networks and shell companies to conduct black operations right under the nose of Western intelligence.
Wow.
The fact that a $70 million weapons deal was being orchestrated from California just shows the deep reach of their intelligence apparatus.
Well, while the FBI is intercepting arms dealers in Los Angeles, the U.S. is dealing with a severe political fracture over the war itself. The sources highlight a summit in Barcelona where Democratic politicians, including Governor Tim Walz and Senator Chris Murphy, traveled there and strongly criticized the U.S. war effort while on foreign soil. They argued the administration has plunged the U.S. into a conflict with no clear objectives, with one commentator calling the president's actions a threat to democracy or fascist curious.
And the domestic pushback from Republicans has been equally intense. They're labeling the criticism as disloyal and treasonous, arguing that fighting the president on a foreign stage fatally undermines the U.S. negotiating position.
Okay, looking at this purely through the lens of geopolitics, ignoring the partisan anger entirely, how does a public domestic fracture actually impact the standoff with Iran?
Well, keeping it strictly objective, foreign adversaries factor our domestic fractures heavily into their strategic calculus. The Iranian regime is monitoring the U.S. political climate very closely.
Of course they are.
If they perceive that internal pressure, rising gas prices, and intense partisan division will eventually force the U.S. to abandon the blockade, well, they will simply stall the negotiations.
Because they think we'll cave first.
Right. They are constantly calculating whether the U.S. has the sustained political will to endure a conflict, especially during a volatile election cycle.
Man, all of these volatile elements, the shadow fleets, the ruined oil wells, the black market arms deals in LA, and a deeply fractured U.S. political landscape, they're all speeding toward an explosive deadline. We are literally hours away from a massive pivot point in history. The ceasefire expires on Wednesday. The stakes could not be higher.
The timeline leaves almost no room for error.
A U.S. delegation featuring Vice President Brogy Vance and Jared Kushner is heading to Islamabad for peace talks. But get this, Iran hasn't even confirmed they will show up.
Yeah, that's a huge variable.
And President Trump has laid out a terrifying ultimatum. If no deal is reached to hand over their stockpile of enriched uranium by the time the ceasefire ends, he stated publicly that, quote, lots of bombs start going off.
Yeah.
He specifically threatened to take out every bridge and every power plant in Iran. The U.S. has doubled its military capacity in the region, and Israel has fully replenished its munitions.
The threat to systematically target bridges and power plants represents a massive escalation in the rules of engagement.
Wait, taking out civilian power plants and bridges, doesn't that cross a massive red line in international law? I mean, that seems like a risk that would completely isolate the U.S. from its allies.
Well, the military reality is that energy infrastructure and bridges are classified as dual-use targets. Because they are essential to the enemy's war effort, they're considered legitimate military targets in a total conflict scenario. If you destroy the power grids and the bridges, you cripple the IRGC's ability to move troops, distribute supplies, and, maintain internal control over the country.
But the core issue driving this entire standoff is the enriched uranium. How does blowing up a bridge neutralize a nuclear program? The sources say these nuclear facilities are buried under 2,000 feet of solid mountain. Conventional weapons can't even touch that. I just don't understand how a bombing campaign solves the actual problem.
And that is the most complex operational hurdle of the entire conflict. You cannot drop a standard bunker buster on a facility 2,000 feet underground. And that is exactly why the sources are discussing some pretty terrifying extreme measures.
Wait, really? What kind of extreme measures?
Chemical area denial weapons.
Chemical weapons?
Yeah. There are serious discussions in the defense community right now about using specialized toxic chemicals, basically spraying them deep inside the ventilation shafts and tunnel networks of these mountain facilities. The goal is to render the bunkers completely inhospitable to human life for decades.
Using toxic chemicals to neutralize nuclear bunkers. That is incredibly dark.
The only alternative is sending infantry troops deep underground to take the facilities by force under heavy enemy fire, which would just be an unimaginable meat grinder. So the U.S. is signaling that if diplomacy fails, they are prepared to utilize unprecedented methods to neutralize the nuclear threat.
Wow, we're staring down a perfect storm here. I mean, we have high seas, military boardings, a fractured Iranian leadership that publicly humiliates its own diplomats, an economic time bomb with only 13 days left before Iran's oil infrastructure begins to physically collapse, and it is all accelerating toward a rigid Wednesday deadline that could fundamentally reshape the Middle East.
And the ripples of whatever happens this Wednesday will hit every market, alter every gas pump, and dominate every political debate across the globe.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering thought. We've focused so heavily on the immediate explosive standoff between the U.S. and Iran today. But let's look past Wednesday. What if the real lasting impact of this week isn't just about Iran's uranium?
Right.
What if the real story is how countries like China, who just watched their cargo ship get boarded and disabled by U.S. Marines, quietly decide they can no longer rely on Western patrolled waters? What if this is the moment they decide to permanently bypass Western shipping routes and create their own entirely independent global supply chains?
I mean, a fracturing of global trade routes on that scale would alter global economics for the next century.
It really would. So we want to turn it over to you. What stands out to you in all this? Do you think this intense economic blockade will force Iran into a historic peace deal, or are we watching the inevitable buildup to a major devastating conflict? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We really want to hear your read on the situation. And make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the show for more deep dives that shortcut the news and keep you brilliantly informed. Because at the end of the day, that single cargo ship floating halfway across the world is still deciding the price you pay at the pump. Thanks for joining us.